Hello everyone, I am Dr. Mary Odio from Nagaland University. In this presentation, we will examine three major strands of modern organization theory in detail: systems theory, contingency theory, and decision-making theory. These theoretical perspectives emerged in response to the limitations of classical and neoclassical models. Each offers valuable insights into how organizations function, adapt, and respond to complexity in today's dynamic environments. Let us now explore each theory and its contribution to our understanding of organizational behavior. As organizations grew more dynamic and technologically complex in the mid 20th century, scholars began to develop more adaptive and realistic models. Systems theory emphasized interdependence, feedback, and the flow of information between parts of an organization. Contingency theory challenged one size fits all models, arguing that the best structure depends on situational factors. Decision-making theory focused on how real people make choices under constraints like limited time, information, and cognitive capacity. These three theories offer powerful insights into structure and leadership behavior. Let's now understand how systems theory evolved in organizational studies by looking at three key thinkers and the context in which they worked. We begin in the 1950s with Ludwig von Bertalanffy, a theoretical biologist. At that time, science and management were dominated by reductionist thinking, which viewed breaking things into isolated parts. He noticed that complex systems in biology, just like organs in the human body, work through continuous interaction and balance. He believed that the same could be applied to organizations. Bertalanffy challenged this by proposing general systems theory, arguing that this same principle of interconnected parts working together as a system can also be applied to non-biological systems such as businesses, schools, or any organization. He emphasized dynamic equilibrium, where systems maintain balance by continuously adjusting to internal and external changes. His work laid the foundation for viewing organizations as open systems. In this view, organizations are not static machines but open systems that constantly exchange information, energy, and resources with their environment. Every department, be it finance, human resource, or operations, is interconnected, so a change in one part affects the others. This model became especially relevant during the post-war boom when organizations had to respond to growing markets, rapid technological change, and increasing complexities. Fast forward to the mid 1960s. It was a time when organizations were becoming larger, more diverse, and increasingly influenced by external forces. In response to these changes, Daniel Katz and Robert Kahn, both leading social psychologists, extended Ludwig von Bertalanffy's general systems theory into the field of organizational behavior. Their landmark book on the social psychology of organizations, written in the year 1966, became one of the most influential texts in the field. They proposed that organizations should be viewed as open systems, constantly interacting with their environments. In their model, every organization functioned through a cycle of input, transformation, output, and feedback. This framework helped leaders and researchers understand how things like consumer demand, regulations, or workforce expectations could influence how organizations operate and adapt. But as the world moved into the late 1970s, things got even more complex. Global competition, social changes, And technological advancements made the environment not just dynamic, but ambiguous. It wasn't always clear what was happening or how to respond. This is where Carl Weick, a prominent organizational theorist, stepped in. Building on the system's foundation, Weick introduced a powerful new lens, which is called as the sense making. In his 1979 book on the social psychology of organizing, Weick shifted attention from structured processes to human perception and interpretation. He argued that in times of uncertainty, change, or crisis, people in organization don't just follow the systems, but they try to make sense of the situation. Instead of asking, what is the procedure? They ask, what's going on here? People observe, interpret, discuss, and then act based on the meaning they construct together. Weick's contribution was crucial. He helped us understand that organizations are not just built on systems, but on shared understanding. His ideas laid the groundwork for modern approaches to crisis management, organizational learning, and adaptive leadership. In short, where Katz and Kahn explained how systems work, Gerlwijk explained how people make sense of those systems, especially when things are uncertain. Together, these thinkers helped transform our view of organizations, which is from mechanical structures to living, thinking systems that adapt, learn, and evolve. Let's now explore contingency theory, a significant development in organizational thinking that emerged in the 1960s. This theory argued that there is no single best way to structure an organization. Instead, effectiveness depends on various contextual factors like technology, environment, size, or leadership. In other words, what works in one situation might not work in another. This was a radical shift from earlier universal theories of organization. One of the earliest contributors was Joanne Woodward, a British industrial sociologist who worked extensively with manufacturing firms in post-war England. She published her key findings in the year 1958, just before contingency theory was formally recognized. Woodward's research focused on how different types of technology, like unit, mass, or process production, influenced organizational structure. She found that the most successful firms did not follow one single model, but they adapted their structure to fit the type of work they performed. Her research was one of the first large-scale empirical studies in management, and it grounded contingency theory in real-world observation. Next, we have Paul Lawrence and Jay Lorsch, both American scholars from Harvard Business School. In the year 1967, they introduced a powerful idea, which is even within the same organization, different departments face different external conditions. For instance, a marketing department might deal with unpredictable consumer trends, while production department faces technical stability. Their model introduced the concepts of one, differentiation, which means that different parts of an organization focus on different tasks or challenges, and two, integration, which means that even though they are doing different things, those parts still need to work together to keep the whole organization running smoothly. Lawrence and Lorsch help to explain why flexibility and coordination are both essential for success. Finally, Fred Fiedler, an Austrian American psychologist and leadership researcher, brought contingency theory into the field of leadership. In the year 1964, he proposed the contingency model of leadership, which argued that a leader's effectiveness depends not only on their traits or style, but also on the context in which they are leading. Fiedler emphasized three main factors: the leader's relationship with their team, the structure of the task, and the leader's authority or position power. Depending on these factors, either a task-oriented or relationship-oriented leader may be more effective. His work was on one of the earliest attempts to match leadership style to situational demands. So together, these thinkers, Woodward, Lawrence and Lorsch and Fiedler, showed us that effective organization and leadership require fit, adaptation, and alignment with context. That is the essence of contingency theory. Let's now turn to decision-making theory, another modern approach in organizational studies. This theory focuses on how decisions are actually made within organizations, not just how they should be made in theory. Earlier, economic models assumed that individuals and organizations make decisions with perfect logic, full information, and unlimited time. But real life doesn't work that way. Organizations are complex, information is often incomplete, and decisions have to be made quickly. Decision making theory helps us to understand these real world constraints. One of the most influential figures in this field was Herbert A. Simon, a polymath in economics, psychology, and public administration. Simon began working on decision making models as early as the 1940s. His major work, Administrative Behavior, in the year 1947, introduced the concept of bounded rationality, which is the idea that people don't always make perfectly rational decisions. Instead, they satisfy a combination of satisfy and suffice, meaning they settle for a decision that is good enough given the time limits, incomplete information, and cognitive constraints. This was a major shift away from classical assumptions of optimization, and it laid the foundation for how we understand decision making in uncertain, fast paced environments. Building on Simon's ideas, James G. March, a political scientist and organizational theorist, collaborated with Simon to develop the behavioral theory of decision making. While Simon focused on individual reasoning limits, March emphasized how organizational routines, standard operating procedures, and culture shape decisions. His work showed that organizations often behave in ways that are not fully rational, but rather guided by habits, rules, and the logic of appropriateness. March perspective helps to explain why some decisions persist even when they don't make sense from a purely logical viewpoint. Interestingly, one of the earliest and the most visionary thinkers in this area was Chester Barnard, a former telephone executive turned management theorist. Barnard wrote The Functions of the Executive in 1938, well before Simon and March. Barnard viewed the organization as a cooperative system where the executive role was to coordinate communication, motivate employees, and build commitment to common goals. He also introduced a radical idea for his time that authority doesn't just flow from the top down. It must also be accepted by subordinates to be legitimate. This idea anticipated modern participatory leadership and employee empowerment models. So, together, Barnard, Simon, and March helped us understand that decision making in an organization is not just about rational analysis, it's also about constraints, social dynamics, and shared meaning. Systems theory reminds us that organizations are not isolated, but they are made up of interconnected parts. Think of a modern hospital or a university. If the human resource department, finance office, and service teams don't communicate and share feedback, the whole system fails. Like a living organism, it must stay in balance, constantly adapting to internal and external changes. Contingency theory says there is no single best way to manage or structure an organization. The right approach depends on the environment. Decision-making theory helps us to understand that in the real world, choices are made under pressure with limited time and incomplete information. Think of how leaders made decisions during the COVID-19 pandemic. Policies were based on the best available knowledge at the time. It was not perfect answers. Herbert Simon would say those leaders were not optimizing, they were satisficing, choosing what was good enough to act on quickly. So, whether we're looking at how departments interact, how leadership adapts to change, or how decisions are made during crisis, these theories offer different lenses, but all helps us to understand one thing. That is, organizations are complex living systems. To work well, they must be designed thoughtfully, led flexibly, and understood realistically. In conclusion, modern organizational theories shifted the lens from rigid rules to adaptive systems, from universal models to context specific solutions, and from idealized logic to real human behavior. They help us understand not just how organizations are structured, but why they respond to the way they do in a fast changing world. These theories don't give just one perfect answer, but they equip us to ask better questions and make smarter choices. Thank you.